My husband left me for a woman 20 years younger right before my presentation, but when I accidentally called her a baby and he turned violent, he lost everything, and now he's begging for forgiveness. I'm 42 years old. I work in marketing for a tech company, and what happened almost a year ago still feels hard to process, even though it doesn't hurt like it used to. I was married to Patrick for 10 years. We had 2 sons, Samuel and Zachary, and I thought we were, one of those couples who had it all figured out. We weren't perfect, obviously, but we worked. Or so I thought. The thing is, one random morning in March, while I was getting ready for a work event I'd been planning for weeks, Patrick came into the room and said, "I need to talk to you. It's important." I was looking for my tie, the blue one I like for presentations, and I told him, "Can it wait? I have to leave in 20 minutes." And he said no. It couldn't wait. That he had to tell me now. I sat down on the bed, still with my shirt half buttoned, and Patrick stood in front of me with this expression I'd never seen before, kind of nervous but also like relieved. You know what I mean? And he dropped the bomb. He said, "I've met someone. Her name is Brittany. She's 25 years old, and I'm moving in with her." Just like that, no preamble. No typical, "it's not you, it's me" speech or anything. Just that direct, devastating statement. I sat there processing it, and the first thing I thought was, is this really happening right now? I had a presentation in 2 hours in front of 50 people, and my my husband of 10 years was telling me he was leaving for a girl half his age. Patrick is 45, by the way, and Brittany 25. I mean, the age difference was ridiculous, but in that moment I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about Samuel and Zachary, about how we were going to explain this to them, about what the hell I was going to do with the mortgage, about 1,000 things at once. I asked him if it was a joke, even though I knew it wasn't, and he shook his head. He said he'd been seeing her for 6 months, that he'd fallen in love, that he needed to be happy. I stood up, finished, buttoning my shirt, found the tie and put it on in front of the mirror, and told him, "Okay, but we can't talk about this now. I have to go." Patrick just stood there, literally with his mouth open, as if he expected me to scream or cry or, I don't know, make a dramatic scene. But the truth is I was in complete shock. My brain just shut down and went into autopilot mode. I grabbed my briefcase, went downstairs, told the kids that Daddy would take them to school because I had to leave early, and left. In the car on the way to the event, I called Gregory, a coworker who's basically my best friend at the office, and left him a semi-coherent voicemail saying, "You're not going to believe what just happened. Patrick is leaving me for a 5-year-old girl. We'll talk later." I hung up and realized I had to focus on work because I couldn't allow myself to collapse in that moment. The presentation went well, I think. I don't really remember, to be honest. I was running on autopilot. When it was over, I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall for like 20 minutes, just breathing, trying to understand what had just happened to my life. That night, after picking up the kids from school and making dinner like everything was normal, Patrick and I sat down to talk. The kids were in their rooms doing homework. I asked him when he was planning to leave, and he said in 2 weeks that he'd already been looking at apartments with Brittany. I told him that was fine, that obviously we had to figure out custody and finances, but that we could do it in a civilized manner. And that's when Patrick started getting weird. He asked me why I wasn't upset, why I wasn't yelling at him. I told him I did care, but that yelling wasn't going to change anything, that if he wanted to leave, then he should leave. I wasn't going to beg him to stay. The next few days were strange. Patrick started behaving erratically, like looking for fights over anything, making passive-aggressive comments about how I was too cold or had no emotions. I continued with my normal routine, working, taking care of the kids, trying to keep everything stable. One afternoon, like 3 days after his announcement, I was at work and wanted to send Gregory a message, saying something like, "Aha, I just got dumped for a baby. Can you believe it?" Because Gregory and I have that kind of dark humor, But I accidentally sent it to Patrick. I realized literally 2 seconds later when I saw the name at the top of the conversation and thought, shit, shit, shit. Patrick called me immediately, screaming, saying how could I be joking about this, that he was suffering and I was acting like nothing. I explained it was a message for Gregory, that that's how we process things, but Patrick wouldn't listen. That night he came home furious and announced he'd changed his mind, that he wasn't going to leave, that I was the one who had to leave if I didn't care about everything so much. I told him no, that the house belonged to both of us, that he was the one who wanted to leave with his 5-year-old girlfriend, not me. The kids were having dinner and started noticing the tension. Samuel, especially, who's 12 and super perceptive, asked me later if everything was okay between Dad and me. I told him yes, that we were just discussing adult things, but I could see in his eyes he didn't quite believe me. Things got worse. Patrick started sleeping in the guest room but stayed in the house, and every interaction between us was tense. Brittany kept texting him constantly. I saw them because Patrick left his phone everywhere, and she sounded super insecure. Like, "When are you coming? Why are you still there? I thought you'd already left him." One night, like 2 weeks after all this, we were arguing about who was going to keep which furniture when we finally separated, and Patrick suddenly yelled at me that I was selfish, that I'd never really cared about him. I responded, calmly, because I was already exhausted from everything, that if he hated me so much, why didn't he just leave already? And then something happened that I never thought would happen. Patrick slapped me. I stood there, my face burning, completely in shock. Patrick also froze, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. I told him, very slowly and very clearly, to never, ever touch me like that again. I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor for I don't know how long. I didn't cry, which is weird. I just sat there processing that my marriage had not only ended, but had reached physical violence. The next day I talked to a divorce lawyer. The lawyer, a woman about 50 who'd seen it all, told me to document everything, to take pictures of any bruises, if I had any. He didn't. To save all the messages, to basically build a case. Meanwhile, Patrick's relationship with Brittany started falling apart. I didn't know the complete details, but from Patrick shouting on the phone that I heard through the walls, Brittany was pressuring him to commit more, wanted him to meet her parents, wanted to officially move in together, and Patrick apparently wasn't so sure about all that. About a month after all the initial drama, Patrick came home on a Tuesday afternoon when I was helping Zachary with a science project, and he looked devastated. Red eyes, wrinkled clothes, smelling of alcohol. And the kids were at the kitchen table, so I told him to go upstairs. I finished with Zachary, put both of them to watch TV, and went up. Patrick was sitting in the guest room crying. He told me that Brittany had left him, that she'd told him he was too old for her, that she wanted someone who would take her to parties and didn't have so much baggage like him. Apparently, Brittany had gotten tired of being the other woman, or something like that. It wasn't totally clear. Patrick was looking at me like he expected me to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I just told him, "You need to get your stuff together, Patrick, because this can't continue like this. The kids are confused. I'm exhausted. And you're destroying this family." He nodded and said he was sorry, that it had been a mistake, that if we could try to fix it. I told him no, that it was too late, that he'd crossed too many lines, and that I'd already talked to a lawyer. Patrick went pale and asked if I was going to file for divorce. I told him yes. Then came the part that truly broke my heart. That night, Patrick called Samuel to his room. I was in the hallway and heard the conversation. Patrick was telling him everything, literally everything, to our 2-year-old son, that he'd fallen in love with someone else, that the relationship had ended, that Dad and I were going to get divorced. Samuel came out of the room crying and came straight to me. He asked me if it was true, if we were going to separate. I had to confirm it, and seeing his face break was, honestly, the hardest moment of all this. Zachary, who's 11, still didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. He started having nightmares, misbehaving at school, things he'd never done before. Teachers called me a couple of times asking if everything was okay at home. I told them, in general terms, that we were going through a divorce and the kids were processing it. The following months were absolute chaos. Patrick was trying to reconcile with me, texting me all the time, leaving me notes, buying flowers. I ignored him. He also started neglecting his responsibilities with the kids. One day, he was supposed to pick them up from school and simply didn't show up. I had to run out of a work meeting to go get them. When I confronted him, Patrick said he'd forgotten, that he was very stressed. I told him that wasn't an excuse, that his children depended on him. I found an apartment, not huge but decent, with 2 bedrooms so the kids could have their own space. I informed Patrick that I was going to move and the kids were coming with me. Patrick threatened to fight for custody, saying I was the one being unstable, the one destroying the family, that he was the father who really cared. I just sent him a message saying to talk to his lawyer, that mine already had all the necessary documentation, including testimonies from the kids' teachers about how Patrick's behavior had affected them. We moved on a Saturday in June. Samuel and Zachary helped pack their things, and although they were sad to leave the house where they'd grown up, they also seemed relieved that the constant fights were going to stop. The apartment was smaller, but it was ours, and for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe. Patrick started having visits with the kids on weekends, and at first everything went relatively well. But then, about 2 months after the move, Patrick did something incredibly stupid. He got back together with Brittany. Apparently she'd come back to him saying she missed him, that leaving him had been a mistake, the whole movie. And Patrick, in his infinite wisdom, decided it was a good idea to introduce Brittany to the kids. Samuel called me one Saturday afternoon from Patrick's cell phone, whispering from the bathroom, saying that Dad had a girl there and it was being super uncomfortable. I told him to hang in there, that I'd go get him, but Samuel said no, that he'd hold out until the visit was over. When I picked them up that night, Zachary was quiet and Samuel furious. They told me Brittany had tried to act like she was their new mom, telling them what to eat, how to behave, all those things. Samuel had told her she wasn't his mom, and Patrick had scolded him in front of her. I called my lawyer that same night. I told her everything, and she said that was enough to modify the custody agreement. Patrick, when he found out I was fighting for full custody, went hysterical. He sent me, like 50 messages in an hour saying I was a monster, that I was taking his children away, that I was going to regret it. My lawyer told me not to respond, that all of that only helped our case. The custody hearing was, basically, the worst experience of my life. Seeing Patrick there with his lawyer, blatantly lying about things he'd done, blaming me for everything, was surreal. His lawyer tried to paint me as someone cold and vindictive who was using the kids as a weapon. My lawyer presented all the messages, the school reports, everything. The judge, an older man who seemed to have seen 1,000 cases like ours, listened to everything patiently. When it came time for Samuel to testify, the judge wanted to talk to him privately to hear his version. I was terrified. I didn't want my 2-year-old son to have to go through that, but my lawyer said it was important for the judge to hear directly from him. Samuel came out of that conversation crying, and the judge looked upset. In the end, the judge ruled primary custody for me, with supervised visits for Patrick until he could demonstrate stability. Patrick left the court shouting that it was unfair, that the system was against him, the whole typical speech. The first months with supervised visits were tense. Patrick would show up to visits with Brittany sometimes, which violated the terms, and the supervisor had to ask her to leave. Eventually, Brittany left him again. I think she got tired of the drama. Patrick started going to visits alone, and little by little he started behaving more like the father he used to be. The kids started to relax with him, although Samuel still keeps his distance. About 2 months ago, Patrick sent me a letter, like a physical letter of 6 handwritten pages, apologizing for everything. He said he'd been in therapy, that he understood he destroyed our family, that he could never make up for the damage he caused, but that he wanted to try to be a better father. I didn't respond to, in the letter, but I did send him a short message saying I appreciated the apology and hoped he would continue with therapy for the kids' sake. Now we're in a strange place where we coexist for Samuel and Zachary. But we're not friends or anything like that. The kids are better, especially now that things have calmed down. Samuel is in therapy too, processing all this, and Zachary has gone back to being the happy kid he was before. I'm, surviving day by day. Some days are harder than others, but I have my kids, I have my job, I have my small but cozy apartment, and that's enough for now. Last week, Samuel asked me if I would ever forgive Patrick. I told him the truth, that I didn't know, that forgiving is complicated and I was still processing everything. Samuel nodded and said, "It's okay, Dad. You don't have to forgive him if you don't want to." And he hugged me. Zachary was drawing at the kitchen table, some superhero he'd invented, and for a moment everything felt normal, like we were simply a small but functional family trying to get by. I guess that's what we are now. And for the first time in a long time, I feel at peace with that.